global warming is happening right now.
What is global warming?
Global warming is a change of climate that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and which is in addition to the natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods.
In English, it is the increase in Earth's average temperature that causes corresponding changes in the climate that may result from the greenhouse effect.
The climate is changing, but the question is why?
Is it because of us?
No, the climate has been changing for millions of years. And is a natural occurrence. Carbon dioxide does not change the temperature of our Earth. They have no relation.
The average temperature of the Earth has gone up 1.4 degrees Celsius around the Earth since 1880, but is not the hottest average Earth has ever had, said by the National Center of Atmospheric Research.
The heating of the world is having its effects, though. From 2003 to 2007, the polar ice caps have shrunk about 30%, according to the New York Times.
This could cause mass flooding across the Earth.
Coral reefs are suffering from the change in the temperature. They are highly sensitive to any change in the temperature of the water.
In some areas, over 70% of reefs have been killed by the change in water temperature.
In the counterargument, some people say that the increase in CO2 emissions from the 1700s is thickening our ozone layer, causing it to trap in radiation and heat up Earth. Also, they believe this is the hottest Earth has ever been.
Over 95% of greenhouse gases are water, and only 0.5 of that are CO2. We're not putting as much CO2 into the atmosphere as we think.
Ecosystems may not adapt to the change in the temperature, and many species may be lost because of this form of evolution. The polar bear hunts on ice, and without this vital resource, the species may die out along with many others.
We know climate change is happening, but we cannot change the fact that the Earth's temperature is naturally cooled and warmed for millions of years, and that's never going to change.
We just have to be prepared for the change and let Earth evolve naturally.
Now let's hear an expert's opinion on this matter.
Okay, so I'm Robert Henson. I work as a writer and editor at the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, and my background is in meteorology and journalism. And I've written several books, including The Rough Guide to Climate Change, and very much enjoy communicating about climate change and all the issues involved with it.
Do you believe that the current spike in global warming is man-made or natural occurrence in the life cycle of the Earth?
Well, the temperatures have warmed up globally a little more than 1 degree Fahrenheit in the last 100 years, and a lot of that has been in the last 30 years. Now, at the same time, we've had a very consistent increase in the amount of greenhouse gases, mainly due to human contributions, and the amount of carbon dioxide has risen more than 30% in the last century, and a lot of that in the last 30 years or so. So these two trends are coinciding, and we know that greenhouse gases trap heat. So to me, the evidence is pretty strong that at least a big chunk of the heating is due to the emissions that humans are producing.
Okay. And why do you say that people think, or what do you say that to the people that think otherwise?
Well, one thing I like to emphasize is that if you want to put forth a different explanation for climate change, for the warming that we've seen, then you have to come up with that alternate cause. And then you also have to explain why the carbon dioxide isn't the cause. Because we know, have known for 100 years that greenhouse gases trap heat. And so if you're saying, well, it's something else, then you have to get rid of the greenhouse gas effect and come up with a plausible alternative. And so those are two difficult things to do. And I think that's been a real challenge for alternative explanations.
And what do you think should be done about the situation regardless of the cause of global warming?
Well, you know, I tend to be, I see myself as an explainer. You know, my job is to look at the science and talk to scientists and then explain it to other audiences. You know, I have my personal views on what might be done in terms of dealing with climate change, but I think in general it makes sense to make energy use more efficient for a lot of reasons, and climate change is one of those reasons.
And how are we going to be affected in the future if we don't react?
Well, that's a very good question, and we don't really know exactly how we'll be affected, but there are some things that are more likely than others. In the long term, like say 100, 200 years, sea level is going to be rising. And even if we stopped burning fossil fuels today, we would have a continued sea level rise because there's heat in the system, and it's going to take a while for the Earth to kind of equilibrate with that. So I think in the long term, sea level rise is going to affect a lot of cities, including in the U.S., Miami, and New Orleans. Over several hundred years, the water might be too high for those cities to continue unless there's a real effort to protect them. In the shorter term, I think what we're going to notice isn't so much the temperature rise or sea level, but it's changes in where it rains and where it doesn't rain. Because climate change pulls water out of the ocean and out of the land. So where it's pulling water out of the ocean, you have more fuel for rain, and heavy rain and heavy snow. And we've already seen a measurable increase in the percentage of intense precipitation. In other words, when it rains or snows, those intense periods are getting stronger. But where it's not raining or snowing, the same heating is pulling moisture out of the dry ground, so the droughts are getting worse. And we saw a good example of that in Texas and Oklahoma. It was the worst drought this year in Texas history. So even beating the Dust Bowl. So I think people are going to notice those changes in rainfall and their effects on your water supply, having to deal with heavy snow and heavy rain. I think that we'll notice that more than the temperatures, at least for the next maybe several decades.